of Mormon, or at least in this case, the book of First Nephi,
Hmm.
and and shown that these civilizations are supposed to be absolutely completely different. Like they don't even mix. So they shouldn't have any reliance on each other. But the two accounts in Ether and in First Nephi have a huge reliance. They're the same kinds of word choices.
What's your response to that? That's sort of the overarching sort of argument that many believers or apologists make about just how complex the Book of Mormon is, and we don't believe Joseph, with his limited education and intelligence, could have done it, or anyone alive today. Could anyone alive today replicate the Book of Mormon? And therefore, if no one today could replicate it in the same circumstances, why are we to believe that Joseph naturally could? Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores church history and the church's truth claims. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores the church's history and truth claims. And this is part 3 of my series that I've been doing with Ganesh Cherian, who is author of the book Joseph Smith, the Architect of Mormonism, which is providing a naturalistic explanation for the contents of the Book of Mormon. Oh, it's a bit blurry there. Could you hold up again?
Sorry.
Oh, it must be your background, because your background's
Oh, I
blurry.
think it's my background. Yeah.
See the book. Okay, I've got the book here. Can I grab it? Sorry, I should have had it in front of me. This book here, Joseph Smith, The Architect of Mormonism, a topical biography. And so in our last episode, we talked about some apologetic arguments or evidences, and also just Ganesh's methodology. We talked about like ancient literary forms, and we talked about ancient names and chiasmus. And we've still got a few sort of questions or apologetic arguments that Ganesh is going to address. But I think people need to go check out the book and take seriously the information and the sources that he points to in there and his arguments. And I think there's been good feedback on our last conversation as well. I think it was a good, respectful dialogue. And I appreciate you engaging with some of those arguments. And also, it was really nice to have you on, David, as sort of a neutral party in the middle, and to get your insights and perspectives as well. So it's good to have you both back.
Thank you.
David is so good. Like I just love the way that he approaches this, particularly because, you know, of course, church history is tough, and we see that it really, is hard for people when they come across stuff which just does not match what they have been told growing up. And so there's that dissonance, that's that, there's a few contradictions. And David is really good about smoothing over some of those, trickinesses, and helping people, get good grounded information so that they can feel, empowered to make great decisions, which I think is fabulous. And he's been trained by the church history department, because this is a real focus of the church, that good history means good understanding, but it does also bring up tough stuff. So really
Absolutely.
fabulous that David engages in that in such a positive way.
And people need to check out your channel, David. What is it? Church history, insights,
Church,
and questions, or no? I can't remember.
exactly. Yep, that's
Oh,
it.
that's it.
Church history, insights, and questions. Yep.
I've just subscribed to help you there.
Thank
And
you.
I think this has also been good for us to perhaps model how people who are on different aspects of the believing spectrum can talk about some of these issues or these topics, and where we might have some disagreements, but can be civil and offer different perspectives. And I think I'm hoping to see more of that in this space. I think on Mormon Stories as well, there's been some recent dialogues with believers, which has been really good as well. I think we need more of that to try to build bridges between each other and understand each other's point of view, and not dehumanize or demonize the other side, even if they come to a different conclusion than we do.
Yeah, and I think that's a really big issue for the church, because the church has previously, and still in the background of, obviously, it's Doctrine and Covenants section 1, the church is the only true and living church, which sets up a dichotomy that if you feel differently than that, then you're on the outer, particularly if you have at some point felt quite good about that. And so so there have been lots of lines drawn, and I'm a historian of Joseph Smith, and that was certainly the case during his lifetime. That if you were with him, or you were an enemy, and that really hard line has preserved a lot of the culture and uniqueness of Mormonism, but it also means that any difference of opinion can be classed as a threat instead of an opportunity to learn and to be compassionate. And that has carried through, for lots of people, the idea that these issues become us and them kinds of issues rather than, hey, let's look at the information, let's figure out what's going on, let's talk about things that we find difficult. And we need to model that. So I guess the church has some confidence that it can also model that. So yeah, I'm really interested in this space and the way to do that well. And I, of course, make mistakes, but hopefully everybody can always hear that I really care, and I want this to be a better space to talk about, tough things.
Love that. Okay, so should we dive into your presentation? I think we left off last time. We finished our conversation on chiasmus. So what's next in the presentation?
All right, let's go through this. I've tried to be quite give a lot of information, so I'm just going to go through these slides because these are what we have done, and people if they're doing this particular part without the others, then they can just stop on these and have a look. But let's go through. Okay, so the next thing, so we did literary forms, and that was the chiasmus and things like that. And our next questions that you got, Stephen, were about ability. So here are a couple of questions. There are actually several that were in the same kind of vein, so I've grouped them together, and then I'll try and answer all of the ideas so you guys can keep me up, keep me honest as I try to answer this question. So David, why don't you read those for us, if that's all right?
Yes. Complexity, ability, Joseph's intellect and genius, both friends and foe, neighbors all unanimously agree Joseph wasn't super well read, educated. I don't believe he was illiterate, but nobody really thought of him having the intellect or skills to have produced the Book of Mormon himself. Your thoughts on Joseph's education and intelligence? Objectively, when I look at the Book of Mormon, it's a pretty complex book to orally dictate. How was Joseph able to do it? Could anyone today repeat what Joseph did?
Okay, well, it seems to me that there's sort of two questions there. One is getting more at Joseph's intellect, his education, his oral abilities, and then the other is talking about like how complex the Book of Mormon is. Why don't we talk first about your thoughts on Joseph Smith's education and his intelligence? Because as I've looked at sources of friends, family members, but even people who are kind of critical of Joseph, most people sort of said that he didn't appear to be that well educated, or some people said he seemed like less than ordinary intelligence. So what do you make about that? Because some people would say that critics who believe Joseph Smith produced the Book of Mormon naturally, he would have needed to be this super well-read, creative, oral genius, reading lots of books, and they would say that would go against the historical sources from friend and foe. So what's your thoughts on Joseph Smith's intelligence and education?
Okay, well, hang on, let me just go to the, sorry. Well, hang on. There's a couple more questions along the same line. Can we kind of do them all together? I think that.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
we're going to go back and forth. There's this. Well, why don't you read this one, Murph? Might be quite good.
I get one might say there's 19th century influences or make arguments for the Book of Mormon being not historical. I agree with you if Joseph is a fraud and the Book of Mormon isn't what it claims to be. but I struggle to believe Joseph orally dictated the Book of Mormon, 588 pages in around 65 working days, that he had the creative genius, oral skills, doctrinal sermons, storyline, and was able to dictate it, and then create fake plates at age 23, which the 8 witnesses were duped by, promised that the 3 witnesses were promised they would have a mass vision / hallucination, which he, as in Joseph Smith, either hypnotized them or they all just happened to hallucinate, and that he accomplished those things as a 23-year-old guy, a farmer on the American frontier. That also feels hard to believe that Joseph did all that. Does it not give you pause that Joseph accomplished all of this? So a lot there to respond to. Where do you want to begin responding to that?
And then we'll
Is there one
we'll
more?
go into a bit of that. I'll separate out the witnesses because we'll talk about them separately.
Sure.
And this one from Brian Hales, my friend Brian. He responds with a pointed critique here. He says, Brian Hales asks, if you read Ganesh's book, we learn he doesn't quote any eyewitness accounts telling us that Joseph Smith was a genius or prodigy or savant or who by the age of 23 could be the architect of Mormonism. There are no such evidences. You could ask Ganesh why no one who knew Joseph Smith accused him of being the intellectual source of the Book of Mormon. None did. People who knew Joseph Smith knew he couldn't do it. But by ignoring the historical record and literally dozens of eyewitness accounts stating Joseph Smith did not have the knowledge or cognitive ability to be the architect of Mormonism, Ganesh reverse engineers the Book of Mormon's content and assumes Joseph Smith was the source. In my view, Ganesh's book describes a mythical Joseph Smith and is supported by a circular reasoning, not historical accounts from people who knew Joseph. Oh, that cuts deep at the heart, Brian. Deep. Brian and I are friends. I've spent a bit of time with him in person, and we've talked at length. So, obviously he might not necessarily agree with my assessment of things, but he's an incredibly lovely guy, and he's like my mother, and I mean that in a really good way. My mother is incredibly intelligent. She's really forthright. She believes, right? So she doesn't take into consideration anything that stops her from believing. And Brian is a lot like that. He's really great at getting sources, in my opinion. Like he collects stuff, he puts it all together, but I don't always agree with his assessment of the sources that he collects, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit as we go, because he's suggested that there's nobody who thinks that Joseph is a genius, or that I didn't put that in my book, and my book was not really about Joseph's ability so much as it was about showing, Joseph's trajectory and where things are. But there's certainly a lot, I believe, I showed a lot of Joseph's ability in the book, and we'll talk about that some more. So, okay, so this is so responding to Brian, but also some of the other people in those other comments. So the general idea is that, could Joseph have done this? And do people think that he could have done this? And what are some of the ways that we might be able to qualify things? So I've tried to take that little bit of a tap, and maybe if I haven't answered those questions properly, that you can just hold me to account.
Fine. So
one of the things that I think is, and Brian often talks about that. Brian's writing a book at the moment where he basically is trying to show that nobody around Joseph or knew Joseph believed that he had the ability to create the Book of Mormon, and so therefore, if nobody around him said that, then he, maybe he couldn't. I disagree with Brian, as you might have already guessed, but I think that there are a number of times that people do who know Joseph, who do talk about him and believe that he is the creator of this text. And the one that I think is the strongest witness of the Book of Mormon process from a antagonist point of view rather than a believing point of view is Isaac Hale, Joseph's father. And, later on in 1834, when they're compiling testimonies from Joseph Smith's past about his actions, they write to Isaac Hale, and Isaac Hale provides this testimony of his experience with Joseph. And one of the things that he says, and we'll read it. We'll read it. Why don't you read it, Murph, for us? It's a great.
Isaac says, his occupation was that of seeing or pretending to see by means of a stone placed in his hat, and his hat closed over his face. In this way, he pretended to discover minerals and hidden treasure. His appearance at this time was that of a careless young man, not very well educated, and very saucy and insolent to his father. Smith began to interpret the characters or hieroglyphics, which he said were engraven upon the plates, the same process as treasure digging, while Harris wrote down the interpretation. I considered the whole of it a delusion. I conscientiously believe from the facts I have detailed, and from many other circumstances which I do not deem it necessary to relate, that the whole Book of Mormon, so-called, is a silly fabrication of falsehood and wickedness, got up for speculation, and with the design to dupe the credulous and unwary, and in order that its fabricators might live upon the spoils of those who swallowed the deception.
So Isaac Hale's testimony about Joseph is a lot longer than this, and I've just kind of pieced out parts so that you can just see them. He describes when he first met Joseph Smith in 1825 that he believed that he was a careless young man, not very well educated. So that's one evidence that people use to suggest that he was not very able. Then Isaac Hale, Joseph Smith Joseph Smith elopes with his daughter, and in this testimony he talks about that, but I've excluded those passages, and this is a huge rift in the family. Isaac loved his daughter. The fact that Joseph eloped and took Emma away, this was a big deal. But when they reconciled when Emma was pregnant in the latter part of 1827, and Isaac invited the couple to come stay on their farm and house them, in which case they came. Joseph bought a box which he said the plates were in, but wouldn't let Isaac look in the box, basically Isaac says that the box was kept in the woods while Joseph used his head in the hat with a stone in it, just like he had done 3 years prior with the money diggers when they'd come to work for Josiah Stoll. And that is the process by which the Isaac Hale watched the production of the Book of Mormon. Because Isaac Hale is, if you've been to the Hale homestead, it's right across the road from Joseph Smith's house. In fact, Isaac gave a little house for them to live in because he didn't want to have Joseph under his roof, because Joseph he believed was a bit suspect, and he wouldn't let him look in this box to confirm what he was telling these stories about these plates. And so he organized for them to basically just be across the road. But this is a main road, runs in and out of what was then Harmony, Pennsylvania. And so people would go by all the time. He would obviously be in and out all the time. And this is 1828 when he's with Martin, when Joseph is dictating the Book of Mormon with Martin Harris. And then in 1829 when Joseph is dictating the Book of Mormon with Oliver Cowdery. And Isaac Hales, one of Isaac Hales' sons, Reuben Hale, was also a scribe at one point. And of course, his daughter Emma is a scribe. And, he's visiting them often, passing by the house all the time. So he's a first-hand witness to what is going on in the home. And he testifies to the idea that, Joseph is his head buried in his hat, with a stone in his hat. That's the production of the Book of Mormon. The whole time, well, according to Isaac Hale, the plates, or whatever this box is hid in the woods. It's not physically in the house.
Question, Ganesh?
So, hi, sorry.
Question for you?
Yes.
I think Isaac Hale is a very interesting witness character. And I know that you quote from him quite a lot in your book. I think it's Lucy Mack Smith who probably gets the award for being quoted the most in your book. But I think Isaac Hale gets quite a few quotes in there. I just wondered, I haven't read his information in detail, but he says that it was got up for speculation. Obviously, he thinks that Joseph wanted to make some money out of this, and you've just referred to the fact that he bears witness that Joseph was using the hat, the stone in the hat methodology. So, does he go on to explain how he thinks Joseph, who he regarded as someone who was not very well educated, does he go on to explain how he thinks Joseph actually did it? How did he manage to, create this book? Does he go into any more detail on that?
Not really. The parts that relate to this, I've pulled out of his account, and really he calls it a silly fabrication. Like he is watching this, so he sees Joseph do it, and he believes that. I think that initially when he met Joseph in 1825, he says, he comes across as a not very well educated, careless young man, saucily and insolent of his father. He doesn't have a good opinion of him. And this does not improve a great deal in terms of his love of Joseph, let's say. But he does consider that Joseph had some skills. I mean, he does call it a fabrication, and a fabrication suggests that Joseph is producing it, like it's coming from Joseph, and he does give the motive, the idea that it's really for for financial gain. That's his understanding of why the Book of Mormon is coming from, and that it is coming only from Joseph.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but obviously a lot of people would sort of disagree with Isaac Hale, particularly if they are faithful Latter-day Saints. They would disagree that, and they would question. So how did Joseph, who was not considered to be well educated, but nevertheless he's produced this 522-page book or whatever, and it's that they extol the virtues of the book in a lot of praiseworthy ways, and so I'm just kind of interested to see if Isaac Hale gave any indication as to how he thought, what was going on. How did he think Joseph was doing this if he didn't think Joseph was at all capable of doing this?
I think that what this says is that Isaac thinks that Joseph is capable. Isaac believes that this is coming from Joseph. He in his statement, he never says that it's coming from the devil or anything like that. He doesn't think that it's coming from some supernatural power, good or bad, right? He believes that this is coming from Joseph. Um, he believes it's a delusion, right? He says, I consider the whole of it a delusion, and a fabrication. But he's actually saying that this is Joseph. Joseph made this.
Yep.
I don't think he likes it. There are plenty of people who read the Book of Mormon and don't see that it's some work of genius, but they, and I'm sure Isaac is one of those people, but he doesn't see it as work of the devil either. He doesn't see it. He certainly doesn't believe it's a work of God. And one of the really interesting things I think about the relationship between Isaac and Joseph is Joseph never talks against his father-in-law. He has seems to have a really great respect for his father-in-law. So even though, Isaac doesn't like Joseph, Joseph slightly reveres Isaac. Joseph, reveres his father-in-law. I think that's important because it suggests that Joseph believed that Isaac was a credible person. It's not the other way around.
Yep.
And this statement, as I look at it, I think Isaac Hale is a credible eyewitness. As I read through this, it is very similar to other eyewitnesses of the translation of the Book of Mormon who also describe Joseph either putting the seer stone or the spectacles in a hat and dictating. It's also quite consistent that he says when he met Joseph Smith, he didn't think he was particularly well educated. That would fit with other sources. Now, his conclusion from watching the dictation is he doesn't believe Joseph is a prophet, so he thinks the whole thing is a delusion. He doesn't believe it's a translation, it's supernatural, it's inspired of God. So are you using this source to say that there were some people contemporaneously at that time who believed Joseph was the author, or what is sort of the argument
correct.
you're trying to... Okay, because is that in reference to Brian Hale saying that nobody believed Joseph could have done it? Because in this case, Isaac Hale would have seen that Joseph is the one dictating it. He's an eyewitness, and he believes it's a delusion. So are you arguing that Isaac Hale believes Joseph was the author because, who else would have it been? Because he watched him dictating with his face in a hat.
Correct. Yes, that's very well said. Thanks.
Okay, I see.
Another thing to be aware of, and it goes back to the idea of Joseph's education. So in 1825, Joseph hasn't had a lot of schooling. He goes to Harmony, Pennsylvania. He meets the Hales. He is enamored with Emma. And so he comes back that whole year in 1826 and lives nearby with Josiah Stoll and then Joseph Knight Sr. in Colesville and South Bainbridge just over the border into New York. And he works for them during this time and goes to school. So he's going to school as effectively a 19, 20-year-old. That, and part of his motivation is he likes Emma. He wants to get together with her, but his father-in-law doesn't approve. But also, she's quite well educated, and she is, she's really good, and he's really rough. So Joseph is aware of this, and he gets himself more educated during that next year as pretty much like an adult student. And we know that Joseph is really he really is interested in learning. He does a lot of it. Even later on in his life, he's forever learning. He starts a Hebrew school. He learns grammar. He studies to become a lawyer. He's got quite a library by the time that he's in Nauvoo. Like he's really interested in learning. And I guess that there's two parts. That is, his education may have well been interrupted, and it certainly was during his lifetime. So it wasn't incredibly formal, but he had a real thirst and love of learning, and he was savvy. Like he was a kind of a savvy guy in terms of being able to relate to people, get information from them, and really do really well with gaining information. So yeah, let's go on to the next slide. Maybe
That's fine.
we can do this now. This is Jesse Smith. Now, Jesse Smith is Joseph's uncle, and Joseph's favorite uncle. In fact, when he had leg surgery, Jesse took him for a while to convalesce at the seaside. There's a number of indications, and one that I put in the book where he learned some things off Jesse. Jesse was well educated. The wider Smith family are very educated, incredibly educated, and Joseph Smith and his family are the poor cousins, but they've come from wealth, they've come from education, and they're always trying to prove to their wider extended family that they've got the goods. And Jesse Smith writes a number of letters. We only have one that's extant in 1829, and this is June of 1829, so this is right in the middle of the dictation sequence of the Book of Mormon. And this is a scathing letter from Jesse. And he knows his nephew well. This is not like he might not have seen him for a little while, but the Smith family, they write letters back and forth. Jesse refers to them, so they're in constant communication. And obviously, from this letter, Jesse is writing that he's heard about this project that they're doing, and he is very upset about it. Maybe David, can you read it for us?
Yes, just to be clear, Ganesh, this is a letter from Jesse Smith. Is that correct?
Correct. It's a letter from Jesse Smith to Hiram Smith in 1829. It was much longer. I've just taken out some excerpts, but it's well worthwhile reading. You can go see it on the Joseph Smith papers.
Yes. In a subsequent letter, you write that you learn from your grandfather's letter that Uncle Jesse Smith thinks you are carrying on a work of deception. In this, he and you are right. Uncle Jesse did and still does think the whole pretended discovery, not a very deep, but a very clear and foolish deception, a very great wickedness, unpardonable, unless you are shielded by your ignorance. Again, you say, if you are deceived, God is your deceiver. Blasphemous wretch! How dare you utter such a sentence? How dare you harbor such a thought? God says, depart from me, ye that work iniquity, and again, these shall go away into everlasting punishment. They shall be cast into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. These are the angels that tell where to find gold books, close quote. Your father has a wand or rod like Hannes or Hambres. He can get your brother's spectacles. He would then be as able to dictate a letter as Joe is to decipher hieroglyphics. If more should be wanting, he can employ the same scoundrel of a scribe, close quote.
There's a lot more of this letter, and it's brilliant, but as you dramatically portrayed,
very dramatic.
It's scathing. It's scathing. I talk in the book actually that I think this letter changes the trajectory of the Book of Mormon, because Joseph's really being held to account, and he knows the kinds of criticisms that are going to come up. So the Book of Mormon responds. This is where we talked last time about the second person narrative. I believe that this and other letters that we don't have from Uncle Jesse are probably the things that Joseph that the Book of Mormon responds to, because the Book of Mormon, when the authors start to address the audience or the reader, a lot of these kinds of concerns that are coming up from Uncle Jesse are being addressed by effectively Mormon and Moroni and Nephi and Jacob. They're addressing the order. This is correct. You'll see us at the bar of God, and you'll know that it's right. That kind of a feeling. these are trying to address these things. Anyway,
We sort of similar to Isaac Hales saying that he believes it's a delusion or deception coming from Joseph Smith. It seems like he's going a step further, believing that this could even be maybe inspired of the devil, or at least that this is not of God. So are you using this again to say this is another person who believed that Joseph was the one creating it? Because the predominant theory for the first 50 years or so after the Book of Mormon was the Solomon Spaulding theory, and most apologists would cite that to say that's because nobody believed that Joseph was able to have dictated such a complex book. And I think there might be something to it, because maybe years after examining the Book of Mormon, they're like, well, there has to be another explanation for it, which is why it was circulating. But again, are you just using this to say this is someone at the time, the grandfather, who believed that it was a deception coming from Joseph, but he's not really, again, explaining exactly how Joseph was doing it, but this just shows that he believed it was deception.
That's right. And he believes that Joseph is capable of it. Even if he doesn't know how he's doing it or explain the methodology, he believes that he's capable, and that the Smiths are capable in general. Interesting, and I just wanted to point it out because we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but he said, your father has a wand or rod like Janus and Jambres, and this is a reference to divining rods. The idea, this Janus and Jambres are the magicians, of Egypt, who challenge basically the Moses in the court of Pharaoh. Oh, yes. So here we've got the wider Smith family, the extended Fifth Smith family, the grandfather and Uncle Jesse, who are really concerned about what's going on with regard to the dictation and all of these things. And they believe that this is a deception. They believe that the Smiths are involved in some kind of, deception. And they believe that they're capable of it. So Joseph is, it's the same kind of thing. To your point, Murph, because you just talked about the predominant idea of the Book of Mormon coming forth was the Stylometric Spaulding manuscript. But this actually happened a little later. Before that, people talked about Joseph writing it. And this
wasn't it
Alexander
1834 in Mormonism Unveiled with the Hurlbut affidavits? Wasn't that really when it was circulating, this theory? So some of these quotes are before then. Correct.
Yes, that's right. So that, I'm going to provide two here. So it's really after the Hurlbut, the E.D. Howe's Mormonism Unveiled, that this takes a tact. Prior to then, this is Alexander Campbell, and he didn't meet Joseph, so he's just purely going on what he's reading in the Book of Mormon and trying to determine how is this come about. Is it from God? Is it from the devil? Is it from man? What is his take on this? And so he says this in 1832. So that he's like I said, he has never met Joseph, so he's doing this secondhand, but this is the kind of assessment he makes of the Book of Mormon. This prophet Smith, through his stone spectacles, wrote on the plates of Nephi in his Book of Mormon every error and almost every truth discovered in New York for the last 10 years. He decides all the great controversies: infant baptism, ordination, the Trinity, regeneration, repentance, justification, the fall of man, and there's a few more. The book professes to be written at intervals and by different persons during the long period of 1,020 years, and yet for uniformity of style, there never was a book more evidently written by one set of fingers, nor more certainly conceived in one cranium since the first book appeared in human language, than this same book. If I could swear to any man's voice, face, or person, assuming different names, I could swear that this book was written by one man. And as Joseph Smith is a very ignorant man and is called the author on the title page, I cannot doubt for a single moment that he is the sole author and proprietor of it. It is certainly, well, I can't see the bottom of my thing.
Smith's fabrication.
Smith's fabrication. So, you know, like now, Alexander Campbell calls him ignorant, but he certainly believes from reading the Book of Mormon that it is Joseph Smith's, product, and he's never met Joseph Smith, so he's not evaluating Joseph Smith on his, character or the way he speaks, or maybe even a conversation with him. He's just purely making this assessment based on the text of the Book of Mormon, and he's seeing that there's a uniformity that suggests that there's one set of figures, and that Joseph is the sole author.
No, my recollection, I need to fact check this because my memory could be incorrect here, but my recollection is that years later, when the Solomon Spaulding manuscript theory was circulating, that Alexander Campbell then shifted and adopted that theory. And one apologetic is once critics began to look at the book more and realize the complexity of it, that's when the predominant theory was then shifted to the Solomon Spaulding manuscript theory, and they almost shifted to that because one, they thought there was all these similarities, which when the manuscript was found didn't really bear out, but perhaps because they, examining the Book of Mormon, saw it being maybe more complex, because he's saying here that he's the sole author and thought Joseph was quite an ignorant man. So apologists would argue that after many years, critics started to shift to the Solomon Spaulding theory because the Book of Mormon maybe has more literary merits and complexity to it, and maybe they saw it being beyond Joseph. But I need to fact check. I'm pretty sure my memory is that Alexander Campbell shifted Spaulding theory, but
yes, and that is the case. That is the case, Murph. I think you've assessed that quite well.
Okay.
My assessment would be that because I think the same things, like as I've gone through independently about Alexander Campbell, that I see the same kinds of things and attribute the text to Joseph. So I think he was right in his first instance. I think he just
shouldn't have shifted to the Spaulding theory.
He should have shifted. But I think you're right that placed the idea that as people evaluated Joseph, they didn't see that he had that, or didn't feel like he had that complexity, and that the Book of Mormon did. So therefore there was how do you explain that gap? And that became the predominant narrative for the next, good 100 years.
Yeah.
But I think that the initial assessment was probably, spot on. And like I suggest, it's in line with both Isaac Hales' assessment and also, Jesse Smith's assessment, people who knew Joseph.
Okay. Do you have any other quotes? Okay, we'll read this one, then I have a question I want to bring up on this.
Yes, yeah. Murph, why don't you read this one for us? Oh, so yeah. This is from so just to give an explanation. This is from those affidavits that were published in 1834. So these are a collection of testimonies from Joseph Smith's neighbors and also Isaac Hale, and they're independent, which is quite good, right? Because it gives us an idea. Isaac Hale never met any of Joseph's neighbors. He wrote independently, but the kinds of things that Isaac Hale talked about were the kinds of things the neighbors also talked about. So that gives us a measure of credibility that they're talking about the same Joseph and the same kinds of ways that Joseph operated. And this is E.D. Howe's assessment after reading all of those testimonies that have been collected. He has never met. He has met Joseph Smith by this point, but there's no indication that he has good what's the word?
Familiarity with them, or yeah. Okay, so he says, all who became intimate with them during this period unite in representing the general character of old Joseph and wife, the parents of the pretended prophet, as lazy, indolent, ignorant, and superstitious, having a firm belief in ghosts and witches, the telling of fortunes. Joseph Jr., in the meantime, had become very expert in the arts of necromancy, juggling, the use of the divining rod, and looking into what they termed a peepstone. His business was to point out the locations of the treasures, which he did by looking at a stone placed in a hat. Whenever the diggers became dissatisfied at not finding the object of their desires, his inventive and fertile genius would generally contrive a story to satisfy them. For instance, he would tell them that the treasure was removed by a spirit just before they came to it, or that it sunk down deeper into the earth.
So what I wanted to show there was that this person didn't know Joseph prior to 1830, but he's utilizing the testimonies that people in his neighborhood and Isaac Hales have said to make an assessment on the Smith family and what they were doing in Manchester, New York, and how they were able to carry on a treasure digging operation that never discovered any treasure. And the line that I like that I've highlighted here, his inventive and fertile genius would generally contrive a story to satisfy them. Isaac suggests that nobody called Joseph a genius or identified him as a genius, but E.D. Howe, in looking at the ways that he operated with his neighbors and his family, that Joseph displayed a form of inventive and fertile genius. He could craft a story that was believable, that convinced them, that gave them, a reasonable and palatable reason that they couldn't find any treasure, that they got this. And there are many accounts, if you read the accounts in Mormonism Unveiled, that happens again and again and again and again with Joseph's neighbors, that they, there's a great story. Some of the neighbors seem to believe the story. Some of the neighbors don't believe the story. Some of the neighbors are skeptical. Others, scathing, and some are kind of just like, oh, well, that's just the Smiths, So it's a real mixed bag. But E.D. Howes identifies that Joseph has a way with people that is able to convince them that what he's seeing in a seer stone, looking under the ground at these events, ghosts and spirits and treasures, and that this is all happening.
So just one or two thoughts I have just briefly on this. I think when it comes to the Hurlburt affidavits, I think in the past some faithful historians or apologists have been quick to dismiss them. I think there's definitely some truth in them when it talks about their engagement in folk magic and the treasure digging, and faithful historians, the church even acknowledges they were involved in that to some extent. I do think that they can at times be a bit antagonistic or uncharitable, calling them like indolent and ignorant and lazy. I think the Smiths were a little bit more hardworking than that. I think I remember a quote from William Smith. He said, "We didn't know that we were bad people until the claims of Joseph and the plate." So I think there might be an element of there's some truth to this, but that they also might have some motivation to speak bad about the Smiths and make them sound more maybe superstitious or more lazy or worse people than what they were in fact. And the other point I was just going to bring up is I thought E.D. Howe sided more with the Solomon Spaulding manuscript theory, and so you're using the statement to support that he thought that Joseph had this inventive genius, like what he was doing in his treasure digging, that he could have when it came to the Book of Mormon. But I seem to recall, my understanding was that he was more of a advocate for the Solomon Spaulding manuscript.
Well, I think that came later, right? As people, gosh, what are the mechanics? How does this actually happen? No, there must have been more people involved than just Joseph. I think that this shows that people did have, from what happened, they suggested that there was something special. No, people don't, just convince people that what they see in their stones is actually reality under the ground. Although, Western New York and Manchester and Palmyra, there were other treasure diggers. There were other people looking into stones. This was certainly not uncommon, but Joseph's ability seems, E.D. Cowles in this instance calls it genius.
Okay, so it seems like the sources you're bringing up here is to respond specifically to Brian's claim of like nobody believed Joseph could have authored. You're saying that some people early on, if they believed that Joseph was the one who was dictating it, but they didn't believe in it, that they thought he was the author, but it was a delusion. I think the core of summing up all of these questions is, and this is sort of my take on Joseph Smith's intelligence and education. I don't think he was illiterate. I don't think he was this country bumpkin. And I think there might have been some motivation from certain believers, like his wife Emma or David Whitmer, to downplay his intelligence, saying he couldn't even write a well-worded letter when we have letters in 1829 that were decently written and well-worded. So I don't think he was dumb by any means. I also don't think he was like the scholar. He was reading tons of books. I don't think he was incredibly well educated. But some people might say that even when you look at some of these critical quotes who say he wasn't super well educated, he had ordinary intellect, there seems to be a gap between Joseph Smith's capabilities, and even if we were to grant, for sake of argument, that he was more intelligent or more educated than what most apologists would say, there's still a big gap between Joseph Smith's intellectual abilities and then him going on to orally compose and dictate the Book of Mormon, 588-page narrative in around 2.5 months. All of the plot lines, all of the geographical references, the internal consistent geography, all the different migrations, the different record keepers, the sermons, the genealogies. How was he able to do that through creative oral dictation, in that time frame, in those circumstances? There seems to be a gap between his intelligence and education and producing the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, and I we'll talk about a few more things, of course, but my thinking, or at least that's what I've tried to show in the book too, is that the Book of Mormon is not for members and believers. Of course, you want to downplay Joseph and upplay the Book of Mormon to create a bigger gap. Whereas I think that they're probably a lot closer. Joseph is more inventive and able than we often give him credit for. And the Book of Mormon has and we've talked about some of the literary devices in it that give it some complexity, but also show that it's likely one person rather than even a group of people. And maybe we can keep that. That will still be a theme as we go on a little bit.
Could I jump in with a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Question for both of you, really. I wondered what your views were on the recent Mormon Stories podcast episode that was suggesting that this timeline of 2.5 months, 65 days, 60 days, maximum 90 days is not really relevant, and their suggestion is this was a production over a number of years, maybe 6 or 7 years. I don't know whether you're aware of those kind of suggestions, but what would you make of those?
So my assessment of that would be, but if you take the 1823, Joseph seeing Moroni, or this angel, and it becoming the idea that there's some kind of story behind the story. So 1823 through to 1829, there's 6 years of forming of stories, and the classic quote from Lucy Mack Smith is that Joseph would entertain the family at night with stories of the ancient inhabitants as if he had grown up among them. So the idea that he's engaging in stories about ancient Americans for good 6 years, there's evidence for that. My assessment would be that he does have storylines which he's crafted over time. And of course, he began in 1828 with dictating the Book of Mormon, and that manuscript was lost, and he's starting again. So he's had a lot of time to think about some storylines and how they would come up. And of course, one of the ones that we talked about last part, Mosiah 9 and 10, I think show incredible amount of crafting of a narrative, some really clever crafting of a narrative, but definitely a crafting. So yes, however, I would also suggest that Joseph is a bit of a sponge, and he's creating in a kind of a collaborative environment. He's got these storylines which he's relaying, and then he's sermonizing on the storylines throughout. That's Mormon through Mosiah and Alma, and onwards. That the ways that he's creating the Book of Mormon is he's got these storylines, he's dictating them. Then at the end of the day, the household is sitting around reading what he has produced. They're commenting on it. They're asking him questions. He's talking about what's going on. Maybe they're relating it to current events which are happening around them, stuff that they're reading in the paper. And then that becomes the fodder for the next day's dictation. Yes, there's a core storyline or a set of storylines, but then there's also a immediate response, a immediate attention to the current environment, which means that the Book of Mormon feels very dynamic. So there's parts which have been crafted over a long period of time. There are parts of the dictation which are in the moment, and that is how the Book of Mormon rolls forth.
Murph, your thoughts on a possible 6-year production line?
So my thought, I think we would all agree that the manuscript evidence would support that the Book of Mormon as we have it today was dictated in the 65 to 74 working days, whether or not you believe Joseph's the author or it's a translation. The 1823 source with Lucy Mack Smith, obviously as believers you would interpret that that's a result of his interactions, maybe his visions with the angel Moroni, and he's relating those to Lucy Mack Smith. From a naturalistic perspective, I would tend to agree with Ganesh. That would be, this is when he's first inventing the narrative, and it would make sense to me before 1829, if he's the author, that he would have thought about these storylines and things and tried to work some things out in his head. And William Davis's theory is that it's a sort of semi-extemporaneous oral dictation. He's sort of got the outline, but it's not recited from memory. I think my only maybe pushback to that is I think the Book of Mormon, because people often say like Lord of the Rings is more complex, or Harry Potter, for example. So even though they would say, yeah, there's some complexity in the Book of Mormon, that doesn't mean it's from God. I think if Joseph Smith had spent years writing the Book of Mormon and lots of drafts and working on it, he had a map in front of him and maybe he had a book about the Arabian desert, those sorts of things. I think it's the mode by which the circumstances of creative oral dictation in those 2.5 months that people think like, man, that's remarkable and extremely rare for someone to produce such a complex book in those circumstances. And a believer would say, even if we granted that Joseph could have worked out some of the vague storylines to it, worked out the characters, how was he able to have done it in those circumstances, doing a creative oral dictation, the burden on his memory to keep the geography consistent, to remember the 30 Jaredite kings, to dictate like the allegory of the olive tree. I don't know if you have a quick response to that, Ganesh.
Yeah, I would add to that Joseph to me seems like a bit of a world builder, right? If you think about those affidavits from his neighbors, he's looking into the earth. He's talking about stuff moving under the ground. He is building a world that he inhabits, and I think we talked about this a little bit last time. The idea of kind of Dungeons and Dragons, that he's the dungeon master, and so he knows the layout of the the world that he's talking about, and he's internalized that world. He's daydreamed about it. He's fantasized about it. He's created it, and so he knows where every nook and cranny is, and he's deposited stories in those places in his head. Like, I don't believe he's writing this stuff down because A, he's poor, and so he's, paper and ink are at a premium, right? Most of the paper that he has for the Book of Mormon comes from somebody else buying it for him. He just
Right.
doesn't have any money. But the idea that you can go into your head and you can create heavens and worlds and inhabit them with these creatures and characters and events, this is something that lots of people do. This is, Harry Potter. It is, Lord of the Rings. You can get so, immersed in that world that and so familiar with it that when you then talk to somebody else, you can describe it with incredible detail. And that's what people do. I mean, we all have worlds that we, maybe other world, unreal worlds that we invest in, that we are highly detailed about. And, Dungeons and Dragons is just you can have a storyline that goes on for years. You can have characters that perform for role playing for decades. This is not unusual stuff. We do this every single day in our lives to escape our realities, especially if they're not fun, so that we can delve into a rich world that helps us to navigate the world through our imagination.
Okay. So any more quotes you have on this section?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to highlight, I guess, the ways in which Joseph had that kind of imaginary world, and lots of people have that in terms of, God. What does heaven look like? Well, people have intricate ideas about what heaven is. How does God operate in the world? People have intricate ideas about what it is. They just happen to be different from everybody else's. But I just wanted to highlight, this is Warren Parrish. Now, he was a real believer, and then he wasn't, right? In 1838. And so people are asking him, how come you believed? What was it about Joseph that you were able to, believe that he was doing what he was doing? And he explained it in this way. He said, I have been Smith's private secretary, called to fill this high and responsible station by revelation, which I wrote myself as it dropped from the lips of the prophet. And although contrary to my natural inclinations, I submitted to it, fearing to disobey or tread lightly the commands of the Almighty. But the most astonishing thing after all is that men of common sense and common ability should be so completely blinded as to dispense entirely with the evidence of their senses and tamely submit to be led by such men and to countenance such glaring inconsistencies, and at the same time to be made to believe that they had God for their author and the happiness and well-being of mankind for their end and aim. So what I just wanted to highlight that this is a skill that Joseph had, that he could impart what was in his brain, the world that he could see quite clearly, and that he could do it with such confidence and such ability that the people who are standing next to them, like Warren Parrish, who are writing down these things as a scribe, that they are fully convinced that this is real. That he's talking about something amazing, and that God is speaking through him, and that and he says, although contrary to my natural inclinations, because he might have naturally been a skeptic, he submitted to it because there was a fear of disobeying commands of God. Also, there was, it feels magical. It is inspiring. It's beautiful. And you just kind of get swept up in the emotion that Joseph manages to take his world, which he's got in his head, and give it to you, and you are able to craft a world and feel and see it as well. That's my assessment of what's I guess the genius or the ability of Joseph to be able to do that. Lots of people attest to this.
Okay, and just one last, I guess, argument that I'll make just on this topic of complexity and Joseph Smith's sort of creative imagination and this sort of all, circulating in his mind is someone might say like, okay, if he was the author, you would totally understand he's sort of immersed in this world and this is all in his mind. Someone might say like, prior to you writing your book, you're probably immersed in all these ideas were swimming in your head and you're researching lots of things. But the pushback someone might give is, but Ganesh, we don't believe that you went into your room, looked at a stone in the hat, and dictated your book, or the Lord of the Rings or the Harry Potter was dictated, in a single draft by someone looking at a stone in a hat. So they might say that even if they were to concede that Joseph, if he was the author, would have had everything in his mind, how was he able to do the creative oral dictation in the time frame without notes or manuscript? And one, why would he make it so complex in those circumstances? Wouldn't that be risky? And how was he able to make it so complex and intricate and all those things? What would you say that how was he able to do it under those circumstances? Because it's kind of like the Nibblies challenge, like replicate it, like someone else do what Joseph did.
But people replicate this all the time. I have a friend who creates fantasy books, and she goes walking in the hills with a recorder, and she dictates the ideas that she has as she walks and talks. That's her device as a dictation device. I use a computer and I'm doing research and I'm typing things. That's my device. Joseph Smith's device was a seer stone in a hat. Now, I don't think he actually sees words on the top of it, but I think it's a way that he focuses his attention, and maybe he's encoded, by the you can imagine, he's got a. Everybody needs, if you're doing things from memory, which is what oral dictation is, you need some devices to help you recall. So when I'm performing comedy, I use my hand. I'm like, this is where I'm going to place my first joke. This is where I'm going to place my second set of jokes. I can't use notes on stage. I can't refer to things. So I've got to memorize, and I use my hand as my memory device. So while I'm on stage, nobody can see this, of course, but I'm touching my thumb to my palm, I'm touching my finger to another finger, and as I'm going through, I'm remembering what I've encoded onto that finger, so that my flow seems seamless. That's just how I do it. When I'm creating a book, of course, I'm typing and referencing and pulling things apart because I can. But if I didn't have any paper and pen, and I was trying to build a set, and I know I need to perform without any notes, I use my hand as my device. I'm picking that Joseph used his stone as the device. It's got little ribs around it. In fact, I've got a replica of it, which I'll get you and show you. So here's our seer stone here. This is a replica of the seer stone, and you can see it's ribbed. I'm picking that Joseph knows this stone so well. He knows where he's encoded his information, so that he can recall it. So that's why he's looking at it. He's using it as a memory device.
And what's your thoughts on the theories of like automatic writing, or the stone just sort of got him either into like this trance, or it just helped him to focus, or like this focal point? And Dan Vogel would say it was sort of like this this conscious sort of composition. It just sort of flowed out of him, and the stone sort of helped maybe channel his mind. Is that sort of your view?
Yeah, I think that we do. That's a common thing, right? How to focus your thinking. There are definitely parts of the Book of Mormon where it flows, like he's just on a run and it just feels great. There are other parts that are a little bit more clunky where he's maybe having an off day and it's just kind of going around in circles, circles, circles. I think that Joseph is probably aware of that. We hear that he feels muddled, so he takes a break and skips stones, or maybe he's had an argument with Emma and he's thinking about that and that's disrupting his thoughts. So goes and reconciles with her so that he can be in flow. This is a creative technique, is the idea of being in flow. I think that is what people who are doing, and I felt it too, right? Or we probably all felt it, times where it's just everything's popping, it's just working so well. And then other times where, no matter what you do, it just feels like it's going flat. I've got, tons of videos of my performances doing comedy. Some of them, people are laughing every second moment. I'm not even sure what they're laughing at, but it feels amazing. And then other times where you say a joke and no one laughs, and it's just that's not much fun. And you try and recover, and you try and think of another idea or another way to engage them, because whatever you're trying in that moment is not working. So these are just the ways that we do creative projects.
Do you have any more questions on this, David? I wanted to bring up multiple authorship and to get your thoughts on stylometric studies. I don't know if that's a question there, but
that's the next one. So maybe we should proceed to that. Just in closing this one, I put this is a screenshot of the text of the original Book of Mormon manuscript. This is Alma 4522, and this is in 1829, probably around April, May. We can't be sure.
Original manuscript.
This is the original manuscript, and this is Joseph Smith's handwriting. So there's a point in the Book of Mormon, and we only have a small amount of the original manuscript, so we don't know if it happens again. But the Joseph Smith Papers Project, shows you that Joseph Smith penned this particular part of the Book of Mormon. So, so Joseph Smith, can write. He's not illiterate, and
right.
This is actual physical evidence that he can dictate, because in this moment he's actually dictating.
I just want to bring up very briefly, what's your thoughts on when Emma would say that Joseph would pick up from where he left off? Because you talk about he would go off on breaks, and they would say it was really remarkable. After he'd finished dictating, he'd go have a break, and then he'd come back and pick up from where he left off without even reading or looking at the manuscript. Do you think they're being honest when she's relating that? And if that is actually what was happening, how do you believe Joseph had the memory to be able to do that? Or do you think they're exaggerating things?
I think that probably happened. It probably didn't happen as well. When I'm on a creative project, sometimes I can, you take a break for some reason and you come back and you just know exactly where you were because you were just in the moment. Other times you have to look over and decide where you were and get you back into the thought process. So I mean, it's hard to tell from her statement whether that is every single time or it's most times or it's sometimes.
Sure.
At least happened once, and I can, yeah.
Yes, you don't think she's lying when she said that, but you don't know if that was every single time or no. That's
exactly
fair.
Yeah. So, but yeah, and then that's, I think, reasonable for anything.
Did you have a question, David?
I thought I had a question, but then I think I'm going to refrain or withdraw it because I think it was a bit silly. I was going to say that I thought that the only bit of text of the original, written by Joseph Smith, was only about 28 words. And then suddenly I realized you've got these two red lines there, and I hadn't seen them originally. So yeah, I'm going to withdraw my question.
Wonder what happened to Oliver. Maybe he fell asleep, and Joseph was like, "Right, yeah. I'll take the pen."
Yeah.
I've got a whole section on witnesses, and maybe we'll just go straight to the stylometrics.
Yeah. We can always
thinking
come
we're
back
going to
if we have
have.
time to the witnesses.
Yeah, I don't think that. Yeah, I think that we probably. Yeah, we don't want to go on too long. Maybe we could come back to talking about witnesses
A part
and
4. How many parts is
part
this going to
4.
be,
Yes.
Ganesh?
Okay, so how about let's talk about stylometrics because I think this is quite fun and also kind of get is in line with the kinds of things that we've just been talking about. So yeah, maybe David, can you read us this question?
How would Ganesh explain different voices in the Book of Mormon, stylometric evidence? The different authors have different voices. Grant Hardy wrote an excellent book on understanding the Book of Mormon, and I thought he provided a compelling case that Nephi, Mormon, and Moroni have different editorial styles and voices. If this isn't proof Joseph didn't write it, does this not add to the complexity and genius in composing?
And my initial question answer would be yes. I prepared a few things that I thought would be useful when talking about stylometrics. Now, so I've talked to a lot of people about stylometrics because this is one of those. So I guess we should qualify what that means. Stylometrics is the idea that you can tell from a word print um, authors or different authors within a group of text. So because of things like the amount of times that you use and or the ways in which you might use particular words or the kinds of ways that you would even put commas and where you would break up your sentences, those kinds of things. So uh, maybe I'll come back to the question by kind of answering a slightly different question first, and then we'll come back. So one of the first people to look at the idea that there was a Mosiah priority to the text. Not the first person, but certainly one of the first people was Brent Metcalf, and he in the book New Approaches to the Book of Mormon, which was 1993. He did a brilliant analysis of some things in the text that suggested two things. One was that Mosiah was written first, and then the last books were First and Second Nephi, the replacement text. So and he did this by showing some very interesting word choices in the Book of Mormon. And you may have seen this before. This is a graph. He tracked the idea, the occurrences of the words therefore and wherefore, and other examples too, but I'm just going to use this one because it's the most stark, where these two words are interchangeable, therefore and wherefore. And he showed that if you looked at the occurrences of these words per 100,000 per 1,000 words in each of the books, you could tell that the Book of Mormon was written with a Mosiah priority. So the graph on the left shows that wherefore wasn't used in any of the books, Mosiah, Alma, Helaman, Third Nephi, Fourth Nephi, or Mormon, but then became really prevalent onwards, Ether, Moroni, First, Second Nephi, through to Omni and Words of Mormon. And the converse was true with the word therefore. So therefore started off being used in Mosiah by First and Second Nephi and Jacob. It's become almost zero. So the idea that these interchangeable words, whoever is authoring the Book of Mormon, they've changed the word that they're currently now defaulting to when they're needing to say, this happened, then this happened, or therefore or wherefore. So Brent Metcalf was able to argue pretty convincingly that the Book of Mormon was written with Mosiah first because this made sense in terms of the dictation sequence. So the dictator, so Joseph in the sense, is utilizing different words. So the dictation is subject to Joseph. Like it's actually, you know, whether you think that he's now the voice, and he's displaying, you know, whatever is on the hieroglyphics into English, he's what is happening to him is influencing the word choices, at least at this very minor level of therefore, wherefore. And so Joseph is an author. There is no question that Joseph is an author. He's absolutely an author. The question is whether he's a minor author and just providing words, which
just providing the translation or expression of the plate text, or if he's the entire author and it's, you know, he's the sole creator.
Correct. Or somewhere in between, right? Is he taking ancient ideas and putting them into a 19th century context?
Sure.
And it's expressing. So but he's absolutely an author. Joseph is an author. There's no question about that. It's just, how big of an author do you think he is? I think he's everything. And you know, others might suggest he's just a, you know, he's just,
he played no part in the translation or dictation process other than just reading
correct.
the words. And I think this is a fairly strong argument to at least some of the language and vocabulary of the Book of Mormon. Joseph had a role to play in it, whether or not you want to believe sole author, translator. So you would use this to sort of undermine the distinct authorial voices, because you're saying that we're seeing this change from therefore to wherefore throughout the dictation process, and we see a similar correlation with the Doctrine and Covenants, which, you know, Joseph was the author of those revelations, the revelator of those. So you're saying this would indicate at least Joseph Smith's language or expression of the translation. He is shifting from therefore to wherefore, and would we expect to see that if, you know, with these underlying different authors?
Correct. Very well and succinctly put. So in last time, or maybe it was the time before, I identified and showed that this second person narrative, you know, where the author starts to address the audience, that also only happens from Mormon onwards in the dictation sequence, which suggests that, from my point of view, I think that suggests that Joseph has employed a new literary device, and now he's employing it again and again and again, whereas it wasn't present beforehand. And that seems to line up with that kind of move to Fayette, and perhaps even, as we talked about before, you know, being able to read these letters that have been sent to Hiram and Joseph Smith Sr. in Manchester, now that he's in Fayette rather than Harmony, and he's now, you know, responding to the accusations of his uncle Jesse, by, you know, encoding that into the text with the voices of the previous of these prophets, and giving them, you know, similar ideas.
So
I've given a couple of
So I just want to bring up, so just to maybe push this a little bit more, because some people see the Stylometrics as having more weight to it. Like whenever I've read articles on it, you know, some people have said that they find, you know, over 20 distinct authorial voices, and they would say like this supports more that Joseph's claim of there being ancient authors. He's the translator. Now, I do believe when you look at even some 19th century authors like Jane Austen or Mark Twain, Stylometrics has been shown that they were able to produce distinct narrative voices, even though they're the sole author. So very capable authors are able to, you know, introduce distinct voices. I do believe from their analysis that they have found, I think, greater, what's the word, difference in the voices in the Book of Mormon compared to those. But one thing that just came to my mind was one specific example is, for example, the prophet Jacob uses certain words to describe God, like Creator, Holy One of Israel. I remember reading, and I was just looking up there about that, and that's very distinct from other Nephite prophets. So even if Joseph maybe had a role as sort of the translator and part of the vocabulary, they might say that with, for example, the prophet Jacob, we see some unique vocabulary that he uses about God that is very specific to him, which seems to be different from Nephi or other prophetic authors. And perhaps that is making its way through from the plate text into the translation. So there still could be something to the stylometric studies. And if this doesn't prove, ancient authors or it's a translation, this just adds more to the complexity that Joseph, in his oral dictation, is able to give them sort of distinct voices. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that those are all very good thoughts. This is, it goes back to my premise that the Book of Mormon is very dynamic. There, like I believe that he's got some storylines, yes, but what is happening in the moment of dictation is really subject to a number of factors, including who is in the room, who's the scribe, what are the discussions that they've had over the text of the previous day, what are the kinds of events that are happening in the immediate environment, maybe in the paper, maybe with these letters, particularly from Jesse Smith. So these are all factors that Joseph is incorporating into the ways that he's expressing what he's feeling. It's not a set thing; it's a dynamic thing. Just like my comedy routines, there's some crafting, there's some planning, there's some desire to have a certain execution, but then there's also what happens in the moment, which can be quite fun and exploratory, and that I think is a better explanation for all of these kind of like with Brett Metcalf's thing on therefore and wherefore. I mean, that's obviously affecting the text, and it's affecting the text, pretty much at Fayette, right? The Mormon ether. This is the transition to Fayette, New York. So that the idea that actually this kind of shows that Joseph is subject to his environment. Why is the dictation words used differently in harmony than he's then using in Fayette? These indicate that Joseph is incredibly prone to his environment. It may be that I don't know, we can't tell what the circumstances is, but it might be that in the Whitmer home they only use wherefore instead of therefore, and now he's picking up on their vernacular as he's dictating and therefore adopting their style. And so
It seems the Book
those
of
kinds of
Ether,
things.
when I look at it, it seems to be like where it's transitioning from therefore to wherefore, because he's still got 24 uses of therefore, but then we've got 63 of wherefore. Would he have been in the Whitmer home when they were dictating the Book of Ether? Because my understanding was it was sort of first and second Nephi, that the small plates was done at the Whitmer home, but I could be off with the chronology.
So there's a number of different ideas. My idea, I guess, and what I think I can show is that I believe that fourth Nephi is the end of the Book of Mormon. I don't think that Joseph creates fourth Nephi in a hurry. That's why we've got 300 years in one chapter, because David Whitmer's coming to pick them up. He's going to transport them to Fayette, basically rescue them. Amaron at the end of fourth Nephi buries the plates, and Joseph doesn't take the plates from Harmony to Fayette because he doesn't think he needs them, because the Book of Mormon is finished. He's going to get to New York. He's going to be reunited with the lost manuscript. The Book of Mormon is going to be done. This is the end. What happens though two things I think that Joseph doesn't envision happening in the move to Fayette. One is that he can't recover the lost manuscript. He's got a powerful seer stone, but he doesn't know what's happened to it. Martin Harris isn't the villain, the wicked man from section 3 that Joseph has made him out to be. Martin doesn't know whether he's an innocent in this, and so Joseph has to do a replacement text. And the other thing he doesn't envision is that the Whitmers really believe, the Whitmers. Joseph doesn't know the Whitmers. David Whitmer is Oliver's friend. He's been writing back and forth to David over the course of the dictation, and David has been relaying those sentiments to his family, and they all believe. So when Joseph gets there, they are incredibly supportive of the project, and he's unaware of that, or at least he doesn't realize how big that is, and that then allows him to do the replacement text. I believe the Whitmers probably, as reading the manuscript, identify the fact that Mosiah had translated the Jaredite record, and this was going to be available. And they probably said, "Hey, where's this Jaredite record?" And he's like, "Oh no, I've got to put that in." So that's where Ether comes from. So I think Ether is definitely done in Fayette. Other people might disagree with me, but I think that there's really good evidence to suggest that the end of 4th Nephi is the end of the Book of Mormon as Joseph envisioned it. And then, the Ether or even Mormon, Ether, Moroni, they're all bonuses. And then the replacement text is also a bonus because it allows Joseph to redo the beginning with a much better beginning. So these things improve the Book of Mormon project in incredible ways. One of the things apart, one of the things we see for that is the second person narrative. Second person narrative doesn't exist before the Book of Mormon, after 4th Nephi. And I think that these are improvements to the text, and they're improvements that are aligned with that change to Fayette.
Okay. One last point on this before we move on to the next section is I remember reading through Grant Hardy's book, and I think that was part of the question. And he, I thought, made an interesting case for different editorial styles for Nephi, Mormon, Moroni. And whenever I talk with Brant Gardner about it, he's maybe less convinced by the stylometric studies because he would see Joseph as, the main translator. It's a functional translation. But he does he sees a case for the different editorial styles. What's your thoughts on that? And would you sort of concede or agree that there's some distinct voices, but you still believe Joseph's the author? But would this not at least add another layer to the complexity of Joseph producing this?
So, yes, although I think that complexity might be accidental. Does that make sense? Like, I do think that that's the case, but I think that I think that that's accidental. Like, when Joseph moves to Fayette, he didn't envision that at the beginning, right? He was quite content in Harmony doing the project. He would have done the whole project in Harmony, but circumstances changed and he needed to go to Fayette. That Fayette change massively changed the whole project. That Joseph didn't plan that. It made the project much more complex. It gave him access to a completely new household with different ideas, with people asking him questions, with them revering him as something incredibly special, and him coming up with answers on the fly in innovative, creative ways. That whole therefore, wherefore suggests that he's picking up on their vernacular and he's adopting it in his own speech, which also suggests that like he didn't plan that. I don't think he's planning to speak like Joseph's, David Whitmer or John Whitmer Sr. or David Whitmer or the Christian Whitmer or these other but when he's talking to them, it's kind of like me, Murph. Sometimes when I want to respond to you, I want to respond in an Irish accent because
I want to
because I
respond
hear
with a New Zealand accent as well.
that's right. Davidson, the mediator with the English accent, but the idea that, when you're talking to somebody, you're so engrossed in their presence, you take on board the way their mannerisms, their voice, the kinds of concerns that they have. You try and align them. And I think that Joseph was really good at doing that. And so the text of the Book of Mormon, particularly from Mormon through to First and Second Nephi and Jacob, that's a lot more dynamic because there's a lot more people that he gets to hang out with. The Whitmer home is a lot busier than the Harmony home. So it's a lot more volatile, I guess, because previously he's pretty much in his Harmony home with his wife Emma. He's got, Oliver Cowdery's fairly new on the scene. Samuel Smith's there occasionally, and Hiram comes to visit. So these are people he knows really well, and so the dynamic is reasonable, but it's not, amazing. But when he gets to the Whitmer home, there's Hiram Pages there, the various Whitmers that are coming to visit and asking him questions and doing these things. There's just a lot more going on, and the text reflects a number of changes just because of the change in location. And I think that affects the voice that Joseph is then projecting as he's dictating.
And just briefly, just one quick follow-up, because I've just been flicking through an article. It was on Jacob as a distinct author, and John Hilton talks about Jacob being distinct from Nephi, and you would believe both would have happened in Fayette at the Whitmer home in the sequence of the translation. And he talks about that both in there's a few chapters in Second Nephi. I think it's Second Nephi 6, 9, and 10, where Jacob's the author, and then we have also the Book of Jacob. And he talks about that we see some distinct vocabulary in the Jacob portions, both in the Second Nephi and also in Jacob, particularly the terminology for God using creator, and that's being distinct from Nephi. I don't know if you've looked into that, but would you see that as Joseph doing this intentionally? Because to me, I see that a bit like, oh, that does seem to be distinct vernacular. And at this point, Joseph would be in the same place for both Nephi and for Jacob. And I at least do see the shift in some of the vocabulary used between Nephi and Jacob. And is he doing this knowingly or not consciously? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think he's probably a bit conscious, right? The idea that he may well take on a bit of a persona that then he projects in the text. So that would be the same as me on stage. Say for instance, I'm trying to imitate somebody, or maybe I am putting on an Irish accent because it's much funnier than a Kiwi accent to my audience. And so I'm taking on a persona and I'm speaking in a different vernacular, and I'm utilizing different types of words because I want to portray that I am, I'm engaging with the audience, but also different voices are cool and it's fun. So just because I speak a particular way doesn't mean that I've not, and I might be using slightly different words, right? But it's just the way I am, I can do it. You can do it. And we generally do it anyway because we speak slightly differently depending on, who we're with and the kinds of information that we're trying to relay.
Okay, well, I think this is something that would be interesting to dive deeper on for myself in subsequent episodes, or to bring on someone who's done a lot of work in this. David, do you have any comments?
I was going to insult Ganesh by saying that was the worst Scottish accent I've ever heard. But I did want to ask whether you've had any interaction with either Brent Mancalf or Grant Hardy on this subject of multi-authorship, which obviously they've done quite a bit of work on. Have they been in contact with you at all, or you with them?
Are you talking to me
Not
or
Grant
Ganesh?
Hardy, but definitely Brent Metcalf. I mean, I've spent quite a bit of time in his home, and we've talked quite a bit. Yes, yeah. I mean, obviously from his work he did in 1993 and continuing work he does now, you know, he thoroughly believes that Joseph is the sole author, and explains some of these things like I've talked about.
Okay. How are you for
I
time?
just Yeah, well, not too bad. Let's finish this section, I think, and and then we might have to do a part four about the witnesses. But I just wanted to add to kind of the stylometric stuff by showing. I just did it. I just put up a table of passages in the Book of Mormon and phrases that come up quite regularly. So this is another, I guess, tell that we've got a singular voice, and this is what effectively Alexander Campbell was talking about, the idea that this is supposed to be over 1,000 years of different um, chronology, and yet often the same words are being and same phrases are being used by multiple authors. Now, again, this could be just that Joseph is the voice, so he's using things from his environment, and that's entirely possible. But you can see from this table, and I'm not going to go through it, but that different large, expansive parts of the Book of Mormon, Jacob through to Mormon, you know, the we see the same phrases coming up, and you can actually do this. You can take phrases and put them into Google's Ngram viewer and track them over time. And what you see, and this is something that Rufsto Merlin author Richard Bushman suggests, that you can take some of these phrases in the Book of Mormon and you can find them as in history. So this graph kind of shows four different phrases, or in other words, the ends of the earth, state of happiness, into the wilderness. And when you put those into the Ngram viewer, you see that the time frame that they were the most prevalent in literature of its day was around 1830, and that those kinds of phrases are not used as much in other, prior to 1830 and then even after 1830. So this suggests that whoever is speaking the Book of Mormon, which we know is Joseph Smith, that he's getting a lot of his phraseology from his immediate environment, and that's affecting the text of the Book of Mormon. And then here's another one with the phrases exceedingly great, war and bloodshed, costly apparel, and thus we see. And as you track those word combinations across literature in America between 1800 and 2020, you can see that they're most prevalent in the time frame of the Book of Mormon dictation. So these are all ways that we can kind of look at the text and qualify them against the evidence of the day. I said before, just as another example, I said before that I believe that one of the great enhancements of the Book of Mormon was that when Joseph got to Fayette and the Whitmers got to hear or read the Book of Mormon manuscript up to this point, that they were probably the ones that identified that there was supposed to be a Jaredite record. And this Jaredite record, wasn't there. And so Joseph is, in my impression, this is my impression, Joseph is kind of scrambling to give an account of the Jaredites, which becomes the Book of Ether. And in many ways, the Book of Ether is like a mini Book of Mormon. it's like a Reader's Digest version of the Book of Mormon. And so I I've done this throughout the whole of the Book of Ether, but I've just taken this particular example just to give you a show. This is where I've related, um, phrases in the Book of Ether with phrases in the Book of Mormon, or at least in this case, the Book of First Nephi,
Hmm.
and 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 shown that these civilizations are supposed to be absolutely, completely different. Like they don't even mix. So they shouldn't have any reliance on each other. But the two accounts in Ether and in First Nephi have a huge reliance. They're the same kinds of word choices. So here's the couple of examples. Ether 1:38, a land which is choice above all the earth. And Ether 2:7, land of promise, which was choice above all other lands. And we see the same kinds of phraseology in First Nephi, a land which is choice above all other lands, the land which is choice above all other lands. These are the same kinds of phraseology. Ether 3:17, and now as I, Moroni, said, I could not make a full account of these things which are written. Therefore, it sufficeth me to say that. And in First Nephi chapter 1, verse 16, and First Nephi 6:2, and now I, Nephi, do not make a full account of the things which I have written, for it sufficeth me to say that we are descendants of Joseph. So these same kinds of phraseologies. Now, again, Joseph is the dictator.
Yeah.
So, I'm just showing that he's an author in this excerpt, but it's not a therefore wherefore kind of a scenario like Brent has shown. I've shown you Brent stuff previously. These are lots of common phrases that both the author of Ether, who is supposed to be thousands of years prior to, well, at least 1,000 years prior to the 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 Nephites or the other parts of the Book of Mormon, and yet we're getting the same phrases. We're getting a very similar storyline. We're getting these really specific word choices. These like, I think the Book of Ether is a little bit of a smoking gun for the Book of Mormon, because it's terrible, and it's definitely not as sophisticated as the rest of the Book of Mormon. It seems to be produced in a bit of a hurry with the same ideas and principles of the Book of Mormon, often the same phraseology, kind of mashed together in a really hurried kind of a way. So yeah, maybe we could do an analysis of that at some future time.
That could be good. Yeah, like, because I think you've shown here that there are similar sounding phrases, something almost verbatim between First Nephi and Ether, which would claim to be different authors. Now, a quick apologetic, because I know Moroni is the one who is sort of the editor or redactor of the Book of Ether or the Jaredite records, and
Yeah.
I believe maybe some of these passages, like Ether 3, for example, is certainly Moroni speaking, so that they might say this could be Moroni trying to echo some of the language of Nephi, because he probably would have had access to the small plates. But even then, it shows that even if you want to say this is Moroni or whether it's Ether, that these are very similar to Nephi. So you would say that this would coincide more with this coming from Joseph Smith, whether or not you go with the author or translator model, that the language is similar here between these two texts.
Yeah, right. Because Ether and Nephi are supposed to be separated by 1,000 years of time, or at least hundreds of years of time. But in the dictation sequence, Ether and Nephi are right next to each other. We don't know which one was done first, but presumably Ether was done first, and then First Nephi was then dictated next. So this is, the fact that Joseph is doing these two things side by side, and we're getting this. And I've just used Ether and First Nephi, but I could use Ether and Alma. I can use Ether and Third Nephi. I've got lists and lists of this, and this might be a good thing for if you want to do it in the future, looking at about the problems of Ether, because it really does, the reason we don't tend to quote Ether a lot, or at least not its content. We quote the passages that Moroni is kind of interjecting in, but often not the passages of Ether, is because the story of Ether is really problematic in terms of its non-complexity. The fact that it's very clunky. It seems to be incredibly hurried and rushed and added on to quite in multiple ways, and these just all seem to indicate a Joseph who is trying to kind of end the Book of Mormon, and just get the information out, and then thinks of new things and adds them, new things and adds them, rather than Ether being a complete storyline. Seems to be a kind of a bit of a tack on.
Okay.
All right.
Maybe I could just bring up, just sort of in summary of this whole thing, maybe just one final apologetic argument on Book of Mormon complexity, just sort of summarizing this, and just get your general response to this. I think, because someone might say, like, okay, even if we can see maybe the stylometric analysis may not be as strong, or this may not point to distinct authors as strongly as what some apologists might say. Some would still point to how Joseph was able to orally dictate this in the 2.5 months. And I've got this quote here that I'm going to read. This came from, I think this is from, what do you call that general authority? Oh, I'm spacing on his name. The one that wrote the case for the Book of Mormon.
Callister,
that's it. Yeah.
Tad
Yeah.
Callister. Yeah.
So he says, during the entire translation process, no one remembers Joseph going to libraries, bringing any such books home, having any conversations concerning this research. Where might we ask is the corroborating evidence? Does anyone honestly expect us to believe Joseph, an unlearned young man of 23 years of age, searched out and studied all these resources on Native American life, inhaled the related conversations on this topic, ferreted out the irrelevant, organized the remainder into an intricate story involving hundreds of characters, numerous locations, detailed war strategies, doctrinal gems, and then dictated it with perfect recollection, without any notes whatsoever, no outline, manuscript, nothing, a fact acknowledged even by among some of Joseph's critics. With all the claims that Joseph or someone else wrote the Book of Mormon, I have never seen anyone match it. Rather than spending an entire lifetime criticizing the Book of Mormon and arguing that Joseph wrote it, why don't the critics just find some brilliant person in his or her 20s who in 65 working days can write a comparable work? And then he concludes that, it's incomparable, that no one can match it. What's your response to that? That's sort of the overarching sort of argument that many believers or apologists make about just how complex the Book of Mormon is, and we don't believe Joseph, with his limited education and intelligence, could have done it, or anyone alive today. Could anyone alive today replicate the Book of Mormon? And therefore, if no one today could replicate it in the same circumstances, why are we to believe that Joseph naturally could?
So the Book of Mormon is unique, obviously, but it's also not unique, right? Lots of the things that it does are things that other works of a similar makeup do, right? We have the Quran, which, Muhammad, said that he got from an angel, and
Angel
he
Gabriel
dictated that, right? So, I mean, that's a long time ago. We don't have the detailed understanding of how that actually turned into a written work, but it's an oratory production.
Right.
That's how people
my understanding
memorize
of that
it.
is because I think I remember listening to an interview on it, and I don't have enough knowledge in this, but I think his sort of revelations in the Quran are probably more comparable to the Doctrine and Covenants versus the Book of Mormon, as I believe that they were sort of like separate revelations dictate over, many years, so being slightly different, like this narrative story within 2.5 months. But I see what you're trying to say, that this
Yeah.
is similar to someone orally channeling a text.
Channeling a text, but also millions, actually, and millions and millions of people adhering to that as something that came from God.
Absolutely.
And we have lots of texts of people, young people, who even who produce works, very young. And like the fact that is it a bit of an accident that this particular thing became important, and just a certain amount of events that created this in this special way. Like, I find the Book of Mormon incredibly special. I love it. But I've also spent a lot of time and energy and going over it. I don't feel the same way about the Quran, and even though millions of other people, billions maybe even, have a great reverence to it. So, part of my bias towards the Book of Mormon is the fact that it has touched me personally. And so I'm willing, I'm often more biased to see things, special things in it, than I am maybe in other works of literature. But, there are millions of people who adhere to and take as their moral foundation the works of Tolkien, and the way that he he absolutely says it's fictional, and he absolutely says that he crafted it. We know he's the author, but even with that, people learn Elvish. They have meetings together where they discuss the text. They use it as their moral foundation. These this is humanity. This is the way that humanity expresses itself, and it ends up being in these particular ways. Does the Book of Mormon have complexity? Yes, absolutely. Does the Book of Mormon have clunky stuff that doesn't fit? Yes, it does have that too. Does it have oral dictation? Absolutely. Is it world building like Dungeons and Dragons? Yeah, that's a good analogy for how extensive the world is that Joseph is involved in. I think, yeah. For me, I can see great explanations, and the text, which is our best artifact, confirms some of these ideas. If I were, if you, I kind of look like a detective. How was this done? What are the clues in the text that tell me this is the way it's done? What are the other things that people have identified are clues? Yeah, that's where I land. And this is a great exploration of those kinds of things.
Yeah, this has been a really fun exploration. I find this fun, these discussions. David, do you have any final comments or thoughts before we wrap up?
I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask, but maybe there isn't enough time to do that. But no, I don't have any particular concluding comments, other than I think Ganesh has done a remarkable job on this book. It's an extraordinary forensic analysis of the text, and so I think it's an amazing job. But if there is another opportunity, I can raise a couple of questions that I have. But
Absolutely.
Awesome. And,
Yeah.
and maybe if you're up for it, we can do a part 4 on the witnesses. I think that they're significant. That was one of the other areas that people were significantly, wanting to have some a discussion around.
Perfect. And some of those questions could be brought up then. But no, I think this has been a fun discussion. I think that these are important conversations to talk about some of these topics and issues, and evidence in favor or against. And again, to try to model how to have a civil discussion while, asking questions of each other. And again, I think people should not dismiss, but check out the book, Joseph Smith, the Architect of Mormonism, a topical biography. I'm also hoping to bring on a faithful scholar to maybe review and offer maybe some critiques or pushback. And I think that's all part of this conversation. I think we need to dialogue and listen to each other, try to learn from each other, and try to come closer to the truth as well. So I appreciate having you both on.
Fabulous.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Murph. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And any listeners who are watching, if you enjoy this, give it a like, comment, share, subscribe. If you also would like to donate to support, you can buy a PayPal or Patreon. And we'll see you next time on Mormonism with Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.
Fabulous. Right.
Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.